She was standing in the kitchen, dressed in a soft pink apron with frills. Her long hair, which usually felt her shoulders, swiftly gathered and pinned up high. I was watching her from behind. "My name is Kenneth." "Hey, Jane, where did you put that?" I was feeling a bit under the weather since the day before, and was looking for my prescription record book before heading to the doctor's, rummaging through the drawers. It wasn't anything serious, but after crossing 60, even a slight indisposition makes you anxious. So I was looking for the prescription record, but couldn't find it and unintentionally called out for my wife, Jane. And then, midway, it struck me. Jane is no longer here. My wife had passed away a year ago. As I made her wryly smile, wondering if I was losing my mind, our pet cat Nettie looked up at me curiously from my feet. "Nettie, you're back." When I spoke to her, Nettie responded with a meow. We did not have children. Perhaps for that reason, Jane doted on Nettie as if she was our own child. Nettie was originally a stray cat, and we found her entangled in the bird net at our garbage collection point. Perhaps because of her stray past, Nettie loved to go outdoors. So even after we took her in, we let her roam freely. "Where did Mama keep the prescription record book?" Nettie ignored me, placing her left front paw on my right foot. I closed the drawer I was looking in, and opened the one below it. The prescription record was not there either. Instead, there were travel brochures. "Next time, take me with you. You've retired now, and you have some free time. Take me with you." Jane asked me to take her to a quaint, rustic hot spring inn, saying that it had beautiful pink moss nearby and she would love to visit it in May when the flowers would be in full bloom. "Okay, I got it. I'll take you," I answered, and she clapped her hands in joy. But just when we were about to go, last April, Jane suddenly collapsed due to a subarachnoid hemorrhage and passed away 10 days later in the hospital. She was 58. As I was lost in thought, spreading out the travel brochure on the dining table, Nettie jumped onto the table and lay down on the brochure. Nettie's trying to look at that." Nettie, still laying down, started purring. "He's about 10 years old. Mid-50s and human years. I hope you live a long life." Nettie rolled onto her back to show me her belly. Half a month after the first anniversary of Jane's death, I planned a 2-night, 3-day trip to the hot spring inn Jane had always wanted to go to. I called the travel agency in the brochure, and they arranged the inn and round-trip train tickets. While I would be away, I decided to hire a housekeeper. But specifically, a pet sitter for Nettie. I searched online and found a pet sitter who ran her business not too far from my home. As I would be giving my house keys to a stranger, it was necessary to meet her beforehand. "Hello, I'm Nova Garcia, the pet sitter." A few days after I made the call, a woman with shoulder-length black hair came flying in on a bicycle with a basket in front. She was huffing and puffing, her cheeks dimpling as she smiled at me at the entrance. She looked about 55 or 56. As I ushered her into the living room and we exchanged greetings, there was a scratching sound at the living room door. The door opened slightly, and Nettie walked in. "This is the one. It would be great if you could close the door when she opens it." As I got up to close the door, she chuckled. "What's her name?" "It's Nettie, she's a girl." "Oh, I see." She leaned forward to look at Nettie and extended her index finger. In response, Nettie walked up to her, sniffed her finger, and then rubbed her head against the back of her hand. It's unusual for Nettie." "What do you mean?" she asked as she stroked Nettie's head. I told her that Nettie never warmed up to any woman other than my late wife, nor did she even approach them. My late wife used to say that Nettie was jealous, thinking I was having an affair. Oh, so Nettie, do you think I'm not worth being jealous of because I'm just a woman like this? As she and I exchanged smiles, Nettie passed under the chair where she was sitting and curled up under the couch by the window. That spot was Nettie's favorite. It was where my wife Jane used to sit, often taking naps with Nettie on her lap. Feeling reassured that I could leave Nettie in her care, I proceeded with my plan and set off on my journey to the hot spring inn. Looking out the train window at the passing scenery, I wondered how many years it had been since I'd last taken an overnight trip. Since then, 3 years, or was it 5 years ago? I flipped open my flip phone and spoke inwardly to the picture of Jane I had set as my wallpaper. You see that? There's a line. Let's join in. They say the noodles here are delicious. That was on our way back from a 2-day trip to a hot spring in Lake Tahoe, which I drove to. From the moment we left the inn that morning, Jane was excited, constantly pointing out noodle shops. The more excited my wife got, the more my mood plummeted. To make matters worse, the roads were congested, and I grew grumpy for no reason. So, we're stuck in traffic, and now we have to stand in line here. No thanks. If you want to eat it, go eat by yourself. I'll wait in the car. It was like a childish quarrel. Fine. If you don't want to eat, then I won't. Eating alone isn't fun at all. We didn't say a word to each other until we got home. I was wrong back then. In the evening, I arrived at the hot spring inn I had reserved. That day, I soaked in the hot spring and ate the lavish dinner served by the inn. It wasn't as good as I expected. It's true, eating alone isn't fun. The next day, I went to see the lawn cherry blossoms that Jane had wanted to see. Red, white, pink, purple, the entire hillside was covered with beautiful lawn cherry blossoms. It was breathtakingly beautiful. I opened my phone and showed it to Jane in the picture. I felt as though I had finally accomplished something important, something I had left undone. The little over 30 years I spent with you, they flew by, and now it's going to be a long time. The day after, I finished my journey and returned home. I arrived at my house just after 4 p.m. Just then, the pet sitter Nova was there to feed Nettie, and they both greeted me. She returned the key to my house, stepped down to the entrance floor, and put on her shoes. Take care, Nettie. She called out to Nettie, who was in the shadow of the showbox next to the entrance. I remembered the souvenir I had bought for her on my trip and said, "Wait a minute," and brought the paper bag with the souvenir from the living room where I had left my travel bag. She was very modest. "Please accept this. Thanks to you, I could travel with peace of mind." Is that so? Then, without any further ado, as we were doing this, Nettie descended to the entrance floor, ran ahead to the front door. "Do you want to go out to see Nova off? Shall we go to the gate then?" I put on my shoes and opened the door. Nettie was the first one out. Then her, and finally, me. I watched her ride home on her bike with Nettie, who was rubbing herself against the hem of my trousers. When I asked her how Nettie was doing while I was away immediately after I got back from my trip, she happily told me. When I came to feed her, Nettie was waiting for me, and she came to greet me at the door. However, the moment it was just the two of us, things changed. Sometimes, Nettie would get food from some cat lover when we were out, something that had been happening for a while. One evening, as I was watching the evening news on TV, I heard Nettie meowing from the kitchen. "Welcome back, I'm about to feed you." As I called out to her and walked to the kitchen, I served her food from a can on a plate where she was sitting quietly. Yet, Nettie would just sniff the food with her nose up close and lick her paw pads without taking a bite, all the while stroking around her mouth, ears, and forehead. "Did you get fed somewhere again?" Nettie didn't respond but kept on stroking her face passionately. Then one evening, even when it was usually time for her to be home, there was no sign of Nettie coming back. I became anxious, wondering if she had had an accident, and went out to the gate calling for Nettie. But there was no response. Then my cell phone rang. "This is your pet sitter, Nova. Kenneth, Nettie is here at my place." "Nettie, at your place?" I explained that I was worried because Nettie was late coming home and had been searching for her outside the house. And I told her that I would pick up Nettie immediately. "It's okay, I'll bring Nettie over," she replied. After about 10 minutes of waiting at the gate, she arrived, waving from her bicycle. Nettie was comfortably lounging in the front basket of her bike. As I waved back at her, I was curious about Nettie. Nettie was usually afraid of women other than my wife, Jane. I invited her to my house for a cup of tea as a token of thanks, and she agreed to stay for a while. When I tried to lift Nettie out of the bicycle basket, she jumped out of my arms and quickly headed to the front door to wait for it to be opened. Even after entering the house, Nettie led us to the living room and curled up on the sofa where my wife often napped, with her front legs neatly aligned and her chin resting on them. I think it was after 5 o'clock. I was about to go shopping when I heard a cat meowing from the garden, she said. When she stretched her neck to see, she said, Nettie was in her front yard. I was so surprised. "Nettie, isn't it Nettie?" I called out. Then, Nettie went towards her, purring and rubbing her body against her legs. After talking about Nettie, we shared our own stories. She divorced about 10 years ago and was living alone in the house her late parents left her. She was living on the rental income from the apartments next to her house. She was doing pet sitting to earn some extra money because she had free time. I told her about losing my wife to a subarachnoid hemorrhage a year ago. I was completely dependent on my wife for household chores, and I can't cook at all, I said. How do you manage your meals every day? Well, you can have everything nowadays. I make do with ready-to-eat food from supermarkets and convenience stores. As I said that, she seemed to be considering something. Nettie seemed to be listening to our conversation while purring. Since that day, she started bringing me homemade meals packed in Tupperware whenever she could. Look, it's easier and more fun for me to cook for two than just for one, she would say. I thanked her and accepted her kindness. But there was one thing. Every time she brought me her homemade food, there was always "This is a treat for Nettie." I suddenly thought, am I being treated like Nettie? Am I just being fed like a cat? This continued for a month or so. Feeling guilty for always receiving her homemade meals, I occasionally bought fruits or some fancy sweets from the supermarket and gave them to her. Before we knew it, it was summer and the holiday was approaching. Since the beginning of August, Nettie had been coming home late again. That day, despite the thick rain clouds hanging in the sky since morning, a cool breeze made it a relatively comfortable day. Frustrated with Nettie not coming home even in the evening, I decided to visit her house for the first time, fearing the worst. That pesky Nettie, as I thought, she's here. Standing at the gate, my eyes wandered towards her front yard. There, seated on the porch, Nettie was contentedly on her lap. Just as I was about to press the doorbell, Nettie raised her head and turned to face me. Recognizing me, Nettie hopped off her lap, stretched her front paws out, made a big yawn, and then stood upright, arching her back and yawning again. After that, she slowly headed my way. Nova also noticed me. "Oh, Kenneth," scratching my head, I took a bow. Suddenly, large drops of rain started to fall. Nettie, instantly changing direction, rushed into the house. "Kenneth, it's raining. Please come inside." As she said, I opened the gate and ran under the eaves at the front door. The rain became a downpour, showing no sign of stopping anytime soon. She invited me to have dinner with her. Well then, I might be imposing, but I would be delighted to accept your kind offer. As I responded, she smiled sweetly and donned a light pink frilly apron. "Is this the kind of apron you'd find at some cafe?" Noticing my wide-eyed surprise, she bashfully explained that the apron was a birthday gift from a friend many years ago. "I didn't usually wear this sort of thing, so it's been put away for a long time. My regular apron has worn out. I live alone, nobody will see, and I didn't want to buy a new one, so I just dug this one out." With that, she turned back towards the kitchen, quickly tying up her long hair that had been down to her shoulders. From behind, I couldn't help but feel my heart skip a beat at the sight of her exposed nape. In the next moment, she let out a small gasp. Nettie had jumped onto the ties of her newly tied apron, undoing them. "Oh, you, such a cheeky girl." I faced her across the dining table. The dinner we shared was delicious. No, it wasn't just the two of us. Right next to us, Nettie was also having her meal. While eating, Nettie let out a series of satisfied purrs. Both of us turned our eyes and ears towards Nettie. And it sounded like Nettie was saying, "Delicious," while eating. We looked at each other and laughed. Nettie hadn't visited her house in quite a while, she explained. She was enjoying a quiet breeze while reading a book on the porch, mindful of the looming rain clouds. That's when Nettie made a casual appearance. Politely sitting down, as if to say, "Please let me stay here," she hopped onto her lap. After the rain stopped, I brought Nettie home. I went straight to the front of the home altar. There were some things I really wanted to report to my late wife, Jane. That I had dinner at Nova's place. How seeing the nape of her neck had set my heart racing. And most importantly, that Nettie had grown fond of her. While whispering such things in my heart and joining my hands in prayer in front of the altar, Nettie jumped onto my lap, rubbing her body against me and purring. When I looked at Nettie on my lap, she was looking up at my face. And she blinked slowly and quietly. I blinked back at her. And it seemed as if Nettie smiled. I looked at Nettie's face and the photo of my deceased wife, Jane, on the home altar. She's not a bad person. I felt as if I could hear Jane's voice just then.